How do we get a sense, just looking at that economy number, as a sort of a barometer of his strength or weakness as a political, as a political leader
Mhm.
of the Republican Party? As we're thinking through, obviously he can't.
They one question that we have asked in our surveys going back to March of 2020 was, if you are a Republican, in our survey we ask you, do you think of yourself more as a supporter of Donald Trump or as a supporter of the Republican Party? And back then, it was leaning slightly more toward Donald Trump, but it was a presidential year. We were a nation in crisis. Like, that kind of makes sense. You get through the 2020 election and he loses, and people begin to flee the Donald Trump ship. I'm just a Republican. I'm not a Donald Trump supporter. After January 6th, that the number of Republicans saying I'm a MAGA Trump supporter first craters. It falls to like 25%. And then it just kind of simmers there pretty low throughout 2021 into 2022. And then you get into 2023 and you start having talk of these indictments, raid on Mar-a-Lago, like all of these things start happening. And you can just see in the numbers the wagon circle. And Republicans are like, nope, they're coming after him and he's my guy. So I'm back in on him. And now when we ask that question, it is like a 2-to-1 margin. Republicans saying they think of themselves as a Trump supporter first rather than a Republican Party supporter. So the fate of the party is
Yeah.
so bound up in Donald Trump right now. And the problem Republicans have is that Donald Trump has created a coalition for the party that's very good for Donald Trump. It is voters who love Donald Trump, or they're pretty checked out of politics, but when he's on a ballot, they're more than happy to show up. But when he is not on a ballot, they're not necessarily like, go GOP. And
Yeah.
that's why some of these special elections, I suspect, have
Right.
been so grisly or going to be so grisly. That just the new Republican coalition is not made up of the people who go out to vote in assistant dog catcher elections. Those folks have become the Democrats now.
Yeah.
Republicans have a big, wide base of people who vote when Donald Trump is there, but they don't turn out otherwise. And I think that is a pretty significant challenge for the party.
I think that's an excellent point. And obviously, as we're coming into a midterm election, that is going to be something we're all paying very, very close attention to, about this new coalition and how engaged they are. But Chrissy, do you think that essentially then, if you're Donald Trump, you're looking at these numbers on the economy and immigration, as you pointed out, that it's worth going all in on immigration? Or is there also a risk that that's an overreach, in the sense that the people who voted for you last time around, not necessarily because of immigration, though maybe they liked it, but really it was, I want him to lower prices, the economy is not working for me, that they get sort of that is something that either turns them off, they don't like what he's doing, or they feel like he's talking about something that isn't the top issue for me.
So I think it really goes back to the question of, what do you think voters voted for Donald Trump to do? And I have no doubt that members of his core base, the people who would have voted for him no matter what, are saying, close the border, fix immigration. And I also have no doubt that a lot of those voters in the center who may not love Donald Trump were nevertheless persuaded, in part by the fact that they felt like immigration had gotten out of control, and maybe Donald Trump's the guy to fix it.
Yep.
So I still think it is an issue that is playing in his favor. However, there's also the question of, what are you focusing on? And even if the actions he is taking on immigration are generally still popular with the people who voted for him, I still think the number one issue is the number one issue. And the number one issue for the voters who were the most kind of on the bubble is cost of living, is Biden-inflation, is all of that. And so that's why I think if it becomes, it's less risky that his voters will suddenly decide, please stop deporting people. I really think, I mean, you could get to a place where there are more sympathetic situations and so on, but right now that is not what has emerged, right, or what I am seeing in the data. However, if there is a sense that he is just not focused on the right issue, I mean, that has created political peril for presidents forever. You can look at what was George W. Bush reelected to do in 2004. Arguably,
Right.
he was reelected to keep America safe and make the Iraq war go better.
Yep.
And then he decides, I'm going to use that political capital to reform Social Security.
Yep.
That wasn't the number one issue. That wasn't what people
Yep.
voted for him to do. And so even though that may have been a good policy on the merits, it wasn't something that was going to help him. You look at Barack Obama, voted to fix the economy. Okay, so you do the stimulus, but then you start getting into the Affordable Care Act. Well, wait a minute. Is that what voters voted for you to do? Becomes wildly unpopular as it passes and gives Republicans an opportunity to win 60 some odd seats in the House.
Yep.
Even Biden, I would argue, I've sort of described it as Americans in Trump's first term felt like they were on a plane that was going through turbulence. And they were like, I would really like to get to smooth air, please. And Biden's like, smooth air, I've got you. And then he becomes president and people start going, is there someone in the cockpit? Are we sure there's a pilot? And suddenly, like, at least knowing you have a pilot when you're going through turbulence, maybe that seems appealing. Like, maybe let's go back to that. You know, that Biden was elected to bring about stability and instead, from my view, this is maybe me putting on my little bit of a Republican hat, like pursued an agenda that was sort of to the left of and not necessarily directly what people had elected him to do. And it led to a little bit more chaos, more instability, paved the way for Donald Trump to come back. So every president who gets elected or reelected has this question. What is
they
it
always
the voters sent me here to
overthink their mandate, right?
Yes.
Overread it.
If I were to say that there's something Trump is doing, though, that I think may be a greater threat on that front, it might be some of the Doge stuff. And if that is sort of calming down and Elon Musk is stepping back, that may all begin to fade a little bit from the public consciousness. But the like gutting of the administrative state and the taking on of, quote, big government and bureaucracy is something that's been on Republican wish lists for so long. Like, that's not just a Trump thing. And so I would find Republicans all throughout this town who don't even like Trump, but we're like, yes, I kind of love it. But is that what voters voted for Donald Trump to do? I think there are some questions about how far they actually wanted him to cut. You know, is he getting muscle and bone here when they're doing some of these cuts? Are they going to affect things that really tangibly matter to people in their daily lives? That's when you can begin to see the political wheels fall off of some of that.
Well, that really leads into this next question. You hear Democrats talking about this term chaos, to your point, that the turbulence, right? When you get Donald Trump, you get chaos, you get turbulence. Maybe you do want to see some of these things shaken up, but he's doing it in a way that is so disruptive that it's actually destroying rather than making it stronger. And then I also sit into these focus groups, Kristen, like you do, and I'll hear people grappling with that, right? Well, they'll say, well, at least he's doing something. Right? Mm-hmm. Joe Biden didn't do anything. This guy, every day he's doing something. And I heard it was a group of Latino men, and one of them said, I really like what he's doing. Like, yeah, cut the Department of Education. I don't know that I love the tariffs, right? So they're trying to grapple with, I like that he's active. I like every day he's going and doing something. But like, what is this going to be? So how are you thinking through at what point voters really come to a conclusion about whether this is good or not good?
I think that he is asking his voters to say, you need to weather a little bit of short-term pain, but I promise there will be long-term gain. And I've seen in a lot of data that among voters who are leaning more pro-Trump, somewhat open to tariffs, that there's really not a ton of support for tariffs as tariffs.
Right.
There's not a lot of Peter Navarroism.
No, they think they're going to be data. All the data that I see too, that these are short term, that he's using this for leverage. He's using this to make better deals. This isn't going to be like a forever thing. This is just art of the deal. Yeah.
Or it might be okay if it's like a little bit painful, but in the end, it means we've got factories opening all over and we're getting back to making things in America again. And I do think that there's a little bit of a worry from some of these voters, like, what happens if we get to Christmas? The factory in my town that closed a decade ago is not back open. but I have to buy my kids fewer Christmas presents.
Right.
And that's like the worst case scenario. You've gotten all the downsides of a tariff, but none of that good stuff has materialized. Because I think even best case scenario for this aggressive trade policy, you're not necessarily going to see. You're not going to see if these supposed or promised benefits
Right.
necessarily popping up really fast. And so, how much pain can you weather before the factories all reopen? That I think he's set up a very tough situation for himself and his own party. But I think he's also responsive to it. You know, there are times where he
Mm.
does things and people scream that it's unpopular and it's outrageous and how could he do this, and he just doesn't care. But he did blink on Liberation Day. And his voters will follow him on his path. Like this idea that he has to double down and he has to do it or his voters are going to see him as weak, I don't think is true. We went into the field the day after Liberation Day, after he had proposed and then backed off the tariffs when the market went haywire. And we asked people, which statement best describes your view? Donald Trump should never have proposed tariffs in the first place. Donald Trump was right to propose tariffs, but also right to suspend them to see if he can get better deals. Donald Trump was right to propose the tariffs, and he should have stuck with them. And like almost no one is in that camp. Even among Republicans, only 10% of our respondents were in the like, nope, pedal to the metal. Why are we letting up on this? You had 7 in 10 Republicans who were like, I'm willing to believe there's a strategy here.
Right.
I don't understand it, but I'm willing to believe that there's a plan.
Right.
And then you had another, 20% of the party that was like, I don't think he should have done this in the first place. I think this is crazy and stupid. But nevertheless, you still had 7 in 10 that were like, okay, let's see where this is going. Like they are still playing wait and see.
Well, and that, Kristen, seems to be the challenge, even that Biden had, which he was so excited about the infrastructure bill, right? All he wanted to talk about is like, we're going to get all these jobs back, right? We're going to be building roads and bridges and the CHIPS Act. And look, we're going to have an Intel factory here in Ohio and we're going to be doing all this stuff. And voters were like, okay, cool, but my grocery bill is outrageous. What are you doing about that? So are we going to get back into that mold too, Kristen, where it's like, okay, that's great. Make America great again. Build the factories, get American manufacturing. But I really can't afford my rent. I really wanted prices to come down. And I don't feel like you're addressing that enough.
Yeah, I think that the short-term pain for long-term gain is just it's always tough politics.
Yeah.
Look at how many times people have attempted things like, well, there haven't actually been that many times. I take it back. But something like entitlement reform. It'll be short-term pain, but it's for the long-term gain of the fiscal health of the country, those sorts of things.
Mm-mm.
It's just tough politics. And the other thing that he's doing is not just asking voters, endure some short-term pain for some sort of vague, unclear long-term gain, but he's also making his own party and asking them, his own members, stick with me. Short-term political pain. Some people might yell at you in some town halls, but long-term people are going to see that we're right and it's going to be a benefit to our party over the long haul. And that's just also a hard thing to ask, especially when you've got these folks in the House that are up for election every 2 years. And if he was not Donald Trump with the unique personal power and hold he has over the Republican voter base, it would be much harder for him to navigate that ask.
Yeah. Well, it was, watching those town halls in 2009 and 10, where Democrats, of course, were getting yelled at about Obamacare. And it was you're going to stick with this vote and it's probably going to cost you your seat. But you can look back at that vote today and say, hey, I did the right thing, right? You'll be able to, historically, you're doing the right thing. And for some people who are members of Congress are willing to say, I'd rather do the right thing and take the political hit. But politicians also are famous for not wanting to take a political hit.
But also, at least with the Affordable Care Act, I think part of the reason why, when I've been asking my Democratic friends, if you could go back in time and warn all of those members who are about to walk the plank for Nancy Pelosi
Yep.
to get this bill across the finish line, tell them how this is going to turn out. Tell them that you are going to lose a Senate seat in Massachusetts because people are going to hate this so much. Do you go back and send that warning? Or do you just like let them walk the plank now, knowing
Right.
what you know? And 100%, oh, I just I don't try to discourage people from voting for this bill. In the end, we know it's a good bill. In the end, it's all going to be fine. And I think that's fascinating. With the tariffs, the question is, what's that end game, right? Democrats had been
Right.
wanting to remake the healthcare system for a long time.
Right.
Republicans have not been wanting to remake global trade
Mm.
for a long time. The tariffs thing is a little bit newer, again, which is why you don't find a
Yeah, that's
huge
so
number of
fascinating.
Republicans who are genuinely diehard tariff fans. They're genuinely diehard Trump fans. And because Trump likes tariffs, it's like the transitive property. Okay, well, he likes him and I like him, so I guess I like them. But that's not the same as the party like craving tariffs.
Right. And yet tariffs are wrapped into this broader concept of what does it mean to be what does the MAGA party mean? And essentially it means bringing America back to a place where we did stuff, manufactured stuff, produced stuff in the country. And whether that comes from closing, right? And it's in every piece of his
Yeah.
agenda, closing borders, the way in which we are interacting with the world, with foreign aid, and now with tariffs, it all is leading to the same place. And I guess that's the question, Kristen, because he has certainly remade the Republican Party. There's no doubt about that in his image. But it seems as if he has remade the Democratic Party as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So talk to us a little bit about that. Where does we always hear about, well, where does the Republican Party go post Trump? Well, where does the Democratic Party
Oh, yeah.
go post
So
Trump?
one,
I
you're
don't know
you're
the answer
right.
to that.
Donald Trump is excellent at moving voters, and not only his own voters, but now suddenly like the Democratic Party just like hates tariffs. Like they think tariffs are terrible. It's kind of fascinating. Everything Donald Trump touches, just immediate like polarization
Yep.
happens. So what's happening on the Democratic side, I think, is going to be fascinating because so think about all the reasons you just gave for why something like tariffs is so core to Trump's message. The idea that like America's been getting screwed. We've been too nice to the rest of the world and nobody's grateful to us for it. We don't make things here anymore. We've let the rest of the world eat our lunch.
Yep.
And what is the Democrats' answer to that? If the answer is like, no, we haven't been getting treated unfairly by the rest of the world, like that's kind of a hard message. No, it's fine that we don't make these things in America. That's kind of a hard message. And so, this question of like being in the spot of defending the status quo is a
Exactly.
really hard place for Democrats to be when you have I'm going to be a check and balance on the president. I'm going to be the brake pedal. He's the gas pedal, but I'm going to be the brake pedal. If they think he's driving out of control, that can be a good message. But if you are seen as I'm defending the status quo, where
Exactly.
America is being treated unfairly, where we're not making things here, where, country X is putting a 50% tariff on our dairy or a 100% tariff on our cars, and that's not fair. So why don't we get to fight back? It's tough. What's the Democratic message? And I think it is notable that you now have, Bernie and AOC going around the country doing these big rallies, doing them in places like Idaho. They're not just sticking to like safe blue territory. They're really trying to build this progressive populist movement. There are ways in which this feels a little like 2009, 2010, beginnings of the Tea Party movement, with the
Mm-hmm.
Republican Party sort of looking at like, how did we lose? We lost this election. Where do we go from here? There's now this progressive president in office and we need to react. And they begin to organize themselves. There's frustration with Republican leadership. They're too weak. They're not doing anything. That eventually turns into this Tea Party movement that ultimately kind of consumes the party. Donald
Yep.
Trump really co-opts it, makes it his own, and he becomes the party. So can populism on the Democratic side do the same thing? And I think there are a couple things that are different about the dynamics on the Democratic side that mean the Tea Party analogy isn't perfectly the same. Like, yes, you have people angrily showing up at town halls, much like you did in 2010,
Yeah.
2009, 2010. Yes, you have people, voters increasingly agitated with what they view as like an outdated leadership model. They're too weak. They're giving in too much, echoes of what you hear Democrats voters now saying about someone like Chuck Schumer. However, a core difference here is that we oftentimes use the words activist and base interchangeably. Oh, what do the
Mm.
party activists want? What does the party base want? And on the Democratic side, those are not the same thing. The activists, the folks who run the groups who sort of demand very progressive issue, fealty on very progressive issue grounds, and my issue is linked to your issue, and you've got to be perfect on all of these, and no, I don't want a big tent that lets these hateful bigot people in. Like that's the activist view for sure. But the Democratic base is not those people. The Democratic base is more moderate,
Yep.
normie, baby boomer African Americans in the Atlanta suburbs, right? Like it's not the same. Their activists and their base are not the same. And so that may well be a moderating force in their party. And it may well be why on the Republican side, you started to see like, conservative Tea Party challengers taking out establishment candidates. And that
That's
seems
right.
like it's been a little bit slower going on the Democratic side. It hasn't caught fire as much. And it's because their primary electorate is not the same as activists in the way that Republicans' primary electorate really was kind of in line with where the activists were. So that's slowing things down. The last thing I'll say on this is like Democratic voters are really mad. And the best thing
Yep.
they have going for them going into this midterm is that there's this emotional asymmetry. Democratic voters are furious and Republican voters are like, things are good. And that's not the same level of intensity. You always want the more intense emotion on your side.